This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 10, Episode 4. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network, brought to you by HK. Today is Thursday, May 30th, 2024, as of recording of this episode. And I am your host, Riley Bowman, joined today by co-host Brian Doc McLaughlin. Glad to have you with me.
Always happy to be here.
Sorry I missed you last week, as well as everybody else, as we didn't get a show done last week. But we're back here today with, I think, a fun topic. We're going to talk today about your first gun and why I now carry an HK. So we're going to talk about what characteristics and features and tips and recommendations for selecting. Not necessarily even just your first handgun, although for some of you listening or watching, it may be your first purchase, let's say. But just selecting a good quality handgun for your purposes, fits your mission, fits your whatever it is you're looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk about what those recommendations are in this episode here today. But first, today's episode is sponsored by KSG Armory Holsters. I actually see a couple of them on display here with us. This is the Lexington holster just over my shoulder here. KSG Armory Holsters, quality gear used by real shooters, people that care about professional gear that works when you need it to. Obviously, we make them now since we acquired KSG Armory a couple of years ago. I wear a gun 14 plus hours a day. I know you carry a gun every day as well. So when you carry a gun every day, you quickly find out what works, what doesn't work. You discover the failure points. There's tons of holsters out there that you can find that they look like the right thing. They look like just about anything else you would find on the market. And then you get enticed by the price because they're made by cookie cutter shops, some of them overseas even. There's tons, like any of the Amazon holsters. Well, maybe not all of them, but many of the holsters you'll see for sale on Amazon are made by shops over in China, made by people that don't care about life-saving quality gear that you depend upon on a daily basis. So all that to say that we care, we wear our guns all day, every day. So get some quality gear, use a quality holster, know that it's going to work and that you can depend upon it. KSGArmory.com. That's our first sponsor today. I think it pairs really well with our topic. We're talking about getting your first gun or buying a gun that again is a quality gun you can depend upon. What are some of the factors involved in that? Well, make sure you put your quality gun in a quality holster. Today's episode also sponsored by EDC Belt Company, edcbeltco.com. It's edcbeltco.com. Got a belt up there on the shelf. My preferred belt. I know you love the Foundation belt. I should say it's the EDC Belt Company is the company name. The product is the Foundation belt. Why is it the Foundation belt? Because it's the foundation upon everything, upon which we build everything else as far as our gear that we carry. If you don't have a quality belt, then you could put the highest quality gun in the highest quality holster, but it might not stay up on your waist very well. The belt needs to support the gear, needs to support the mission, needs to support everything you're doing. So
belts are an incredibly important piece of kit. Pretty often I'll have people who will talk to me about, hey, I'm wearing a belt. I'll just use that as a tourniquet. Like if you're carrying a weapon in a dangerous situation, you need that to hold all your gear in place. It's carrying your gun and your spare mag and all of the things that you need to make that situation work. So getting yourself a quality belt is a very important piece of gear, making sure that you've got one that's going to work for you. And your situation in particular. The Foundation belt is really nice because it's so low profile. You can wear it on a plane, no issues and all that kind of stuff. And the same with a holster. A lot of new people, when they first buy their first gun, they tend to kind of skimp on the holster because they already put out so much money on this gun, right?
Yep.
And then they're going to drop another $45-$80 maybe on a quality holster. And a lot of times they'll just go for the cheap option, but you don't want to do that. A holster is similar to a scabbard for a knife or a sheath for a knife. You're not just going to walk around all day and carry your knife. It would be really dangerous and you wouldn't be able to put it down ever. you'd have to have a safe place to store that weapon. And holsters are the exact same thing that a sheath is to a knife. So making sure you got a quality one to keep your weapon close and at hand, but also safe is, one of those important things.
Right. Yeah, I can't agree more with that. It's excellent logic. Guys, check out the foundation belt at edcbeltco.com. Thanks to our sponsors that make this episode possible today. Folks, I know many of you have been listening or watching the podcast for a long time, a lot of years. I know some of you from the very beginning. It's been over 8 years now, nearly 800 episodes, many millions of downloads. And we appreciate you for still being here with us and for supporting us and supporting our mission. If you know us, you know that we care about bringing you the best quality information, education, products, gear, and so forth. Advice as best as we can offer it. And I hope that you'll take the time to share this podcast episode today with your friends, your family, your coworkers, your buddies, your shooting buddies, whatever. Please help us continue to grow the podcast. Click that share button if you're watching or viewing this on Facebook, or if it's on YouTube, or if you're listening in your favorite audio podcast player later on. Please consider sharing the podcast with those you care about so they get the best quality information as well. Should let you know before we get into our topic today that it's actually next week as of the recording of this episode. I think it runs June 1st to June 7th. But when this is published on the podcast feed, it will be in that week. It'll be next week. So you should know that during the week, the first week of June is called Gun Storage Week, sponsored by the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Super important that we not only talk about having the right gear and equipment, guns, holsters, belts, and so forth, but that we're being responsible with what we do with those guns and things, that we are storing guns safely and responsibly. So please consider, go to gunstoragechek.com to learn more about Gun Storage Week. Please consider being responsible with how you safely store your firearms and other life-saving gear. It's also important to properly store ammunition, even sharp objects, knives, and things. You got little kids around, but we're focusing this next week on properly, safely storing our guns. Gunstoragechek.com. If you don't have a proper safe, then at the very least use a pistol lock that is required by federal law that ships out with every gun. Or make a small, modest purchase this week. In fact, you can go on concealedcarry.com and search under the gun safes product category and find just some basic pistol vaults that are hard-sided, that lock really well. Definitely consider having something like that in your home. Even the most basic small pistol vault to properly store your firearm when it's not in use or not being carried by you. Please. We've shared a number of times on the podcast of very, very tragic stories of usually little kids that harm themselves or others, or kill themselves or others because of firearms not being stored properly.
Yeah, if you're buying your first gun, there are things that you need to make that gun work. You got to buy ammo, you got to have a magazine, eye protection and ear protection so you can go out and shoot it, but you also need to have a way to store it. So if you're buying your first gun, just add that into the cost of that first purchase for sure. So that way you've got a safe place to store it. No one's going to come in and steal it. Most common ways that criminals get a hold of guns is they just steal them from people's houses, from their vehicles. Make sure you're not leaving a weapon in your vehicle, because that's one of the top places that they're going to go and try to find those weapons. So
exactly. Yeah. So true. And yeah, I can't say anything more about that. Anyway, there you go. We talked about sponsors. We talked about Gun Storage Week. Now let's get into our topic today. Your first gun and why I now carry an HK. So basically, we're using this as an example of, I've carried a number of guns over the years.
What was your first?
You want to know my first gun I carried? I've talked about this on the podcast, and it is embarrassing, but I don't care anymore. I was a poor, not even quite college student, because I hadn't quite started college yet. I bought my first handgun, age 21. I was so excited. I turned 21. I'm like, man, I'm buying a gun. But I was poor. And I went into a small, local shop. And I'm looking at everything in the display case. And this was like the heyday for this sort of thing, because I walk into this store and for $89, I see a pistol. And I'm like, I got $89. Mm-hmm. Well, can you guess what you could buy in like 2000? What would it be, like 2000? I don't know, 2003 or something like that. No, not quite. Anyway, what can you buy in like the early mid 2000s for $89?
Not much. Maybe a 22 rifle kind of a thing, or
Well, this is a handgun.
pistol. So
it was a high point.
9mm or what? 380.
380.
It was the 380 even.
I didn't know, Jack.
Good old yeet cannon.
Yeah, yeet cannon for sure. Although it was a lesser yeet cannon because it was in 380. That was my first handgun, and I carried it too. It didn't last very long.
Yeah.
I had it for a number of years. I eventually got rid of it, but I kind of wish I still had it actually, just sort of like that, like, I don't know.
History.
Yeah, history, right? Because I would totally like, show it off with pride, like, oh, this was the first yeet cannon I owned and carried. But yeah.
It kind of reminds me a little bit. My family has this family heirloom of a Walther 380 that my grandpa got off of a dead German officer in World War II. And at some point, that could have been your version. You pass it on to your grandkids. This is Grandpa's. He was a gunfighter. This is Grandpa's gun.
Right. Yeah. So that was the first gun. Like I said, I quickly realized the error of my ways. It was reasonably reliable. Reasonably, it wasn't, but it was not what you really want in a self-defense pistol. So
now I've got this philosophy or this theory, right? Like sometimes you get people who go out and they
go ahead.
It's got all the tricks and everything, and they take that out and they expect to run that like someone who's experienced in shooting. And at the same time, like I feel like it's important for you to understand what a bad gun does. Being able to shoot that 380 high point, that's a big difference from your HK that you're shooting now.
Right.
But you wouldn't know that difference if you never started off with something that was just so simple like that. You'd never be able to appreciate it, I would imagine. Well,
that's a fair perspective to have, I think. Yeah, I definitely have an appreciation for quality equipment now. Knowing that I've sort of seen it all. And then, by the way, that was not my only bad purchase. That high point. I've had a number of them. The worst was, and understand that. There came a time as I was trying to, because I hadn't yet learned what it took to, make or to have, like what went into a quality holster. And so for years I'd be frustrated with my inability to conceal a gun well and to be comfortable. So I went through a number of just really crappy holsters. And so I remember at one point thinking, oh, I just need to get a smaller gun. And I went smaller and smaller and smaller. Including things like Ruger LC9, a Diamondback 380.
Oh, I remember those.
Jeez, that was junk. That one was literal junk. I dang near wanted to throw it in the trash can, but then I was like, oh, I can probably get $150 out of it.
Well, holsters are very similar to that too, because I mean,
Absolutely.
everybody that I know that's been carrying a gun for a long time has got a huge box of holsters that they've slogged through, until they finally found one that works for them and is comfortable, because you have to carry a lot before you understand what works and what doesn't. And everybody's different. Everybody's got a different body type. So you might have to try out a couple of different holsters before you find one that really works for you.
Yeah, well, and most of us had those boxes of holsters because we didn't know enough at the time. And so we bought crappy stuff. And I'll just tell you this, most of my mistakes were because I'd go into Sportsman's Warehouse or Cabela's or something like that, a big box store. And, oh, well, let's try that one today. And, and that would last a week or two or three. And then you're like, yeah, this isn't working. Then you go back and you try a different one. And you go back again and try a different one. And then you realize, what a lot of the big box stores are even selling aren't that good. Those things are typically what you find in big box stores are mass produced for the masses as low cost as possible, right? And they've got to fulfill as many needs as possible, meaning you'll see a number of holsters that are advertised as being multi-fit. They fit a number of different guns, different models of guns, all in one holster kind of thing. Hybrid holsters are really egregious in that regard, as they don't typically fit the gun nearly as precisely as like something that's, custom molded, for like this gun here, for instance, that's sitting on the shelf behind me. And so what you're going to find is that they're just not that good because they're trying to mass produce these for as many people as possible and ultimately just make money. It's not about putting quality gear in people's hands. It's about making money. That's what that big box store exists for. I'm not like trying to crap on them too harshly because I'm glad to, I give them business. I got to go in occasionally and buy stuff.
Yeah, but don't buy your holsters from them.
Just, yeah. Holsters are a very important, nuanced, individualized choice that fit in, like how John Hauptman explains it from Filster about how like fitting a holster to a person is kind of like fitting a prosthetic to somebody. Somebody's lost a limb, like that's a very custom process. Like that prosthetic has to be made and customized to you got amputated above the elbow, let's say, like and whatever is left there, like that's shaped and that's different than like what it's going to be for Brian or for Jacob or for Jason or whatever. And so everything's got to be customized to the individual. And that's kind of how holsters, maybe a little bit less so, but that's kind of the idea. And I like the way he explains and thinks of that. And so we make a Lexington holster, let's say, and it's made basically the same for every customer. However, it's very customizable because you can very easily, you have your choices of a number of different hardware attachments, different wing or claw attachments, clip attachments, loop attachments. The wedges we sell along with the holsters or provide with the holsters, those could be customized to you as well. They could be placed specifically in different places on the holster. Different length of the holster, different height sweat guards, and so on and so forth. Like KSG Armory strives to be kind of this semi-custom, in between a production holster company and a full custom company, sort of a production-like product, but gives you that custom ability to really make that holster yours. So anyway, not trying to like go too far down into the weeds on that. The point here is that quality gear, and the same is true with the gun, the same is true with the holsters. These are very personalized, individualized, nuanced choices and decisions we have to make. And so, yeah, let's get a little bit more into, you asked me about my first gun. I told you what it was, and I've gone through a number of different things over the years. I learned the error of my ways. When I think I finally got on track with where I should have been from the beginning, and that's ultimately what our goal is with the podcast, is I don't want our viewers and listeners to have to slog their way, as you described it, through dozens and dozens of different holsters that don't work. I don't want you to slog your way through dozens potentially of guns that aren't, the best choice for you either. We're here to help save you time, money, effort, trouble,
narrow it down,
all that, right?
Yeah.
That's ultimately what we're here to do here today. Let's talk about selecting your gun, whether it's your first one or your 10th one, selecting the right gun for you. First, I guess, category, if you will. Reliability, right?
Yeah.
Gun's got to be reliable. It's got to work. We carry a gun, we use a gun most of us are probably in a self-defense context. And this is the Concealed Carry podcast. So that's the context that we're going to frame this within for purposes of our discussion here today. So if you carry a gun, it's for personal defense, and seconds matter. Tens of seconds matter potentially, right? So you don't have the luxury of, 1 out of every 100 shots, this thing jams, malfunctions on me, right? Like that's not acceptable because that's just too common.
I only carry 99 extra spare ammo, so just in case.
So reliability is the first thing when we're talking about guns, especially for carry, for self-defense use.
So how would you test reliability? Say you got somebody new and they want a reliable gun. How would they gauge whether or not a gun is reliable or not?
It's a very good question. And I would actually say, let's start more basic than that. I think it's a good place to start by some of the first guns you should consider should be ones that, by reputation alone, you already know them to have a history of reliability. Okay, so what I was saying a moment ago is when I finally kind of started getting on track with where I think I should have always been, and it was because of my own personally held biases that that I had from a young age. I remember the first time I ever shot a Glock, and I thought it was a terrible gun. I just like, oh, I hate Glocks, and so I always had that in the back of my mind. And at the same time, like I think deep down, I knew that they were reliable. And I mean, I knew that a lot of cops carried them. As a child growing up in the '90s and becoming a young adult and through the 2000s, like 70+% of law enforcement. It's a little bit less so now probably, but 70+% of law enforcement are carrying Glocks. There's a reason.
Yeah.
That's a clue, right? And the one thing about Glocks, I mean, there are exceptions for sure. I've seen a few over the years, and usually because they're modified or they haven't been maintained very well. But you can just about count on buying a Glock, pulling it out of the factory package, out of the case, stick a mag in it with ammo, and go to the range, and like it's going to go bang, 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 pretty much every time, right? There's a history of a track record of reliability with Glock pistols, right? And so that's when I first started carrying a Glock, it took me a while to get there. I may not have liked it as much as some other things, but I knew it was reliable. I knew that it was easy for me to buy magazines for it, other aftermarket products. It was easy to find holsters for. We're going to talk about some of these things some more here in the episode. But yeah, like that, I would say that's like the first thing, Brian, is like, and maybe not everybody knows what's some of the more quality guns are, let's say, but I guess we can just mention what some of those are right now. I mean, I just mentioned Glock, right? SIGs generally are pretty reliable in my experience. I've owned a number over the years, including classic line SIGs. P2. I got a P229. I've got an SP 2022. That's a polymer framed kind of double action, single action pistol. I've got loads of P320s and P365s and variants of those. They've all been very, very reliable. What else? HKs, of course. And that's of course is what I carry now. I just spent this last weekend shooting my HK VP9L, 750 plus rounds. The gun itself, perfectly reliable. I did have a couple of bad rounds. I had 2 that failed to fire, and I'm confident that was not the gun itself. Definitely had like good, firing pin primer strikes on them, and they just didn't go bang. I was using cheap training ammo. So anyway, so the HKs, very reliable guns. But those have a track record of reliability. What else? Smith & Wesson, like the M&P line of pistols.
My personal favorite.
Yeah, Smith & Wesson's made some less good stuff over the years, like the older Sigma pistols.
Yeah, those aren't very
Stay
good.
away from those.
The M&P series, I love that. I don't know what it is about that. The ergonomics, the gun, the bullets just go where I want them to without me even thinking about it. Any other gun that I pick up is not like that, but I really love the M&P myself.
I did too. They're great guns. So, I mean, right there, like those are probably like 4 big ones to really kind of hone in on. Like if you can't find something from Glock, SIG, Smith & Wesson, or HK, well, I don't know what to tell you. Like there's lots of options just within those 4 big brands. And that they have a track record of reliability and performance. So it's a good place to start. You know what I mean? So when you ask, like, how can one test? Well, it's like, before you get to the testing, like, how about we first start looking at stuff that we know has a track record of performance and reliability? And let's start there. Okay. And if for some reason within what's available there, you don't find something that you like or that you're interested in or doesn't fit your needs for whatever reason, okay, we can start looking outside of that. And there certainly are other quality brands that could be considered. But there's some downsides that come with that. And we'll talk, we have some other factors here we'll discuss with regards to that, but actually testing the gun. So let's talk about that a little bit. So my personal, especially if it's a gun that is not known to be inherently reliable based on track record of performance, then my personal opinion is I want to probably put about 1,000 rounds through a gun and not have any gun related failures before I really feel warm and fuzzy about it.
Well, there's also a break-in period. Yes.
Depends. That used to for sure be a thing. Like, 2-3 decades ago, you bought a gun, you could expect that, it should be broken in, if you will. many of them now, especially the polymer frame striker fired pistols, even the manufacturers won't tell you that there's a break-in period per se. There are some exceptions to that, like Shadow Systems guns. They tell you that it's a 500 round break-in. Like you should use hot, like 124 NATO spec ammo, like hot ammo, hot ball ammo for like 500 rounds to break that gun in.
Mm-hmm.
And people, say, hey, my Shadow Systems gun's not reliable, maybe have not followed that break-in procedure fully.
Mm-hmm.
I would say today's consumer is not interested in breaking in a gun. And that's fair. Like, I don't want to have to break in a gun either. Like, I want to be able to use it right away if I can. But that is something that can be a factor. In which case, break that sucker in. Put 500 rounds, 1,000 rounds through it right off the bat. Get that thing, up and going and running.
So if they have a couple of stoppages or something that happens in that first couple hundred rounds, then it could be that it's a brand new gun, and maybe see if it runs another 100 rounds.
But again, with like those big four that I mentioned, Glocks, Springfield, or not Smith and Wesson, HK, and SIG. I have not, in my experience, found that those need to be broken in. You know what I mean? And if I have failures in the first 200-300 rounds, then that's a concern for sure. So, especially, from those brands. At the very, very, very least, because I realize that for people, dropping, 1,000 rounds, a case of ammo through a gun, that's an expenditure, in today's prices. And by the way, ammo is going to get worse. Like, just get ready. It's an election year, and there's some ugly things on the horizon in terms of the supply chain side for ammunition components. Ammunition is going to go up again, and it's going to get harder to find. I'd buy some now if you have the opportunity to do so. I would do so. So we're looking at, let's just say $200 for a case of ammo. Well, that's $200, right? I get that. That's nothing. That's not nothing. That maybe feeds your family for a week or something in groceries. I don't know. Depending. Not my family. My family's too big for that.
Not here where I live.
Right. But still, that's $200, right? But understand that when we buy a gun, part of the decision making, part of the process of buying that gun is, okay, I need to be also thinking ahead and planning to buy some ammo to then actually run through that gun so that I can have some confidence that the gun functions and works like it should. That I didn't, somehow get a lemon, which lemons do exist. I've seen some Glocks that, that just for whatever reasons built, on a Friday at 4:30 p.m. or whatever,
Well, there's also, you also need to be a little bit worried about you being a new shooter and not understanding how to properly grip your weapon. You could be inducing stoppages accidentally.
That's a fair point.
And so it might not even be the gun. It might be you that might be, causing that particular malfunctions.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That definitely be the case. And that's something to be aware of. I mean, that's hard to know if you're a newer shooter and you just don't know what it is you're doing because you don't know what you don't know. That could definitely be a factor.
Well, we're talking about new guns here, and a lot of times people will go out and they want to buy the latest and the greatest with all the widgets so that they're great shooters. But don't forget, you have to get this training. You got to go out and learn how to use this stuff, or it's not going to do you any good at all. That saying, it's not the brush, it's the artist. It doesn't matter what gun Riley picks up, he's going to be able to, run that no problem. That's because he just has so much time on it, and he understands that kind of stuff. So get out there and start getting that training. That's what's going to really make any of this beneficial.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. So at the very very least, especially if it's of a more reputable brand, I'd want to put 500 rounds through a gun with no failures or stoppages, unless it's ammo related. And in which case, it probably makes sense to use some quality ammo as part of that. And then the other thing too is understand you should test it with your chosen self-defense ammo too. Mm-hmm. Like you really should, because there's plenty of guns out there that are very reliable with factory ball FMJ ammo. And understand that the nose, contour of those factory ball or FMJ bullets it's very conducive to, it helps with reliability because they feed really well because the contour of the bullet, the nose of the bullet. Whereas our self-defense rounds are typically hollow points of some kind, It's squared off. It's got, maybe some sharp edges or corners on the opening of the hollow point of that round, and that can get snagged up somewhere. And it, depending on the feed ramp and angles and everything, might not, your chosen self-defense load might not really be compatible with your gun.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, choose a different gun or choose different ammo, right? There's lots of choices for ammo too, so it probably makes more sense just, okay, I'm just going to try a different self-defense load. I like to do, where possible, at least 100 rounds of my chosen self-defense ammo through the gun as well, with no stoppages or failures.
Mm-hmm.
That, again, is a cost, right? I mean, of your chosen self-defense round, most self-defense rounds are about $1 a shot, or sometimes if you get a good deal, maybe you can get it for 70, 75 cents a round, but a lot of times they're kind of in that $1 per round ballpark. And so you're talking, let's say you're going to run a case of ammo of just training ammo through your gun, and you want to test 100 rounds with your chosen self-defense ammo. That's probably another 100 rounds on top of $200 for your larger test, if you will. And so now you're $300 plus perhaps into just ammo expenditure to shoot through your gun, verify that it's reliable. And you should know too, like, this is, like, you might think about it and like, well, that's just a cost, but there's a benefit that comes from that too. Number one, the reassurance that your equipment works and that your self-defense ammo is compatible with your gun, it's going to work. And number two, you get some training benefit from all of this too. Just so while we're testing the reliability of our guns, like that's a training benefit. Don't do it just like
it's an opportunity.
Don't just do mag dumps into trash at your favorite outdoor range, just so you can, do this test, if you will. Like, yes, it's an opportunity to make yourself better and to really learn your gun, because it's, if it's a new gun for you, like, you want to use that as an opportunity to really learn it as well. So make that practice as you're kind of going through this test protocol, if you will, to benefit from that as well on the training side.
Now, a question about duty ammo or defensive ammo.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think I remember hearing that you need to swap out your ammo every now and then, because
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the nose of the bullet gets deformed as you load it in and out, and your admin reloads and all that kind of stuff. But then you also don't you get a degradation of the powder inside of the bullets themselves?
It can be the powder. It can be the degradation of the primer. Understand that the primer compound in the primer is sensitive and can, even from shock of being chambered again and again and again, can break that compound down. And so the recommendation is, depending on who you talk to, I've heard a number of different philosophies. Like, some are very, very strict. Some will say, don't ever chamber around more than 2 times.
What?
Yeah. So I actually just heard that in a recent
training.
That
kind of capital. I'm not
sure. What do you think? Money grows on trees,
I'm running ball for now. I don't know, man.
So I've heard that. Okay. Some I've heard suggest don't chamber more than 4 times. Some just follow and I think what probably is a little bit more reasonable recommendation for most folks is swap it out at least every 6 months. Or if you notice the bullet get pushed back into the case, or the bullet itself gets deformed. So that's three conditions. If you notice a bullet is deformed from being chambered too many times, if you notice that the bullet's pushed back, that's, can be tricky to notice. But if you line them all up and you got good ones, and oh wait, that one's a little bit lower. Okay, you can do something as simple as that. You should be able to see when it's pushed back. If you can't recognize that it's pushed back, it's probably still safe, I would say. But if you see bullet pushback, or it's deformed, or it's been longer than 6 months, swap out your defensive ammo. It's essentially, I think, a reasonable protocol to follow.
When in doubt, change it out. You don't want that going down when you need it the most.
Absolutely. Yeah. You could have, just imagine this. You haven't swapped out your defensive ammo in 2 years. And the one that's in the chamber of your gun right now, that primer has degraded enough to where it's a dead round. And just like, you don't want to draw your pistol and find out that the day you need that for your fight, you don't have a round chambered. Well, now you got a round that won't fire. Both those are ugly scenarios for you when you need your gun right now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just understand some of these considerations with ammo too. Yeah.
And part of the training that you need to learn is if your gun does have a malfunction, and which is a definite possibility, either user induced ammunition or whatever's happening, you got to learn how to clear that in the moment.
Yep.
So part of the training is learning your gun might go down. It's a good possibility. In the intensity of the situation, maybe you get a thumb in the way or something stops that slide and you need to get that gun back in the fight. You got to know how to do that. So training, again, your gun might go down. You got to know how to fix it.
Absolutely. All right. So reliability, we've spent actually more time on that than I anticipated. But there's a lot there. Let's talk about the next factor in choosing your first gun, caliber. All right. So where do you start with that? What are your first thoughts?
So my first thoughts goes to like how I grew up. My dad carried a 45 caliber for a long period of time until he eventually swapped over to 9mm, only based on my recommendation because I was carrying the Glock. And my dad was very hardcore, 45, 9mm don't kill, it's too small, and that kind of thing. But then going to Afghanistan and getting to experience a lot of the combat that I saw, it was clear to me that 9mm is adequate. It does the job. It puts holes in people and puts them where you want them to go. It's also very easily managed recoil-wise. You get a lot of extra capacity round-wise, whereas 45 caliber and larger types of calibers, you don't get that capacity nearly as much, which reduces the number of times you need to reload in the middle of a fight, which is always great. And so when you start to see the wounding patterns of 9mm, it's not very effective. You can shoot people quite a few times with 9mm and they'll still get up and go do things. When you start seeing rifle rounds moving at that really high velocity, that's when you start to see those much more devastating wounds. So you got your 5.56 and 2.23 that are coming out of the AR or M4 style of rifles. That's putting a lot of energy into your target very rapidly. So those are always a much better option for putting bad guys down. But we can't carry those everywhere with us. So what is our option? We need to find a nice middle ground between capacity, stopping power, and reliability. And I think 9mm hits all of those wickets. It's the current round that's being used by all of our military. So that's got to say something. If they're using 9mm, it's probably going to be, useful and beneficial to us. So when it comes to caliber selection for defensive carry, that tends to be where my mind goes is the 9mm. Going smaller than that, the bullets start to lack a lot of energy and knockdown power and stopping energy. Going higher than that, you start to reduce on capacity and you're not getting a lot of extra benefit. So it's finding that perfect little middle ground. And there is no perfect little middle ground. You're always going to be making concessions in some particular category. But from everything that I have witnessed personally and the research that I've done, it seems to be that 9mm tends to run supreme.
I think you hit the nail on the head with respect to, it's about the balance, right? Like we have all these factors we're trying to balance. I could carry a single shot pistol of some kind that fired a single 12 gauge slug. That would suck to shoot, with a handgun, but
you'd only have to do it once.
But that would be the thought, right? As long as I didn't miss, okay, cool, right? But that is only one round. And is there the potential that I could miss? Yes. Is there the potential I could need more than one shot? Yes. Is there the potential I could have multiple assailants? Yes. So, it's like, okay, I could have all that firepower in one shot, but that doesn't help me out very much when I need capacity, right? At the same time, I'd go something really small. Let's just say a 22 long rifle, which, by the way, they absolutely are very deadly, especially when shots are placed where they need to be. But is it less desirable than something that's got a little more oomph? Of course it is. We all know that, we recognize that. So striking that right balance, I think, is key. I've heard from ER docs that, from wounds that come in, that sometimes it can be very difficult to tell whether a person was shot with a 9mm or 40 or 45.
Well, right.
The
hole is only slightly bigger because the rounds, the reason why it's not so effective is because they're just moving slowly. That is the main problem. It's not the size of the bullet necessarily that does change the diameter of the hole, but only a little bit. What you're really looking at is all of that energy going through. It creates this temporary wound cavity, and the more energy that's going through, it disrupts more of that tissue as the bullet is traveling through. And so you tend to disrupt much more body systems than just that path of the bullet. So not only are you hitting the lungs because the bullet's running through, you're also hitting the heart and the liver and the intestines and all these other body systems. And you're more effective at putting that person down because you're hitting multiple things that they need to stay up and moving.
Yeah, it's important to be clear on this, that when you talk about temporary wounding mechanisms, temporary wound cavities, that all rounds are going to create some amount of temporary cavity as it enters and moves through the body. However, the velocity of handgun rounds is not great enough for that temporary wound cavity to outpace the elasticity of human tissue.
Well said. That is absolutely true.
And rifle rounds are moving. I mean, we're talking, and so that, and the magic threshold is somewhere around 2,200 feet per second. When we start crossing that threshold into where temporary wound cavities stretch tissue beyond their elasticity, and then that's what causes things to rip apart, to stretch apart, and so essentially all the problems you mentioned earlier are true regardless of whether you're carrying a 45 or a 9mm or 40 or whatever. And so what we're focused on is our pistol bullets are, what they do really well and exceptionally well is poking holes in people. You could take essentially like a number three piece of rebar, 3/8 inch piece of rebar, and poke it through somebody, and that's about what you'd get with a 9mm bullet.
I love how exact you are on that. Only you would know that with your construction background. The right size of rebar that matches 9mm.
That's about what you can expect. Is that's it's essentially. I mean, Tom Givens in the Rangemaster Instructor Development course I was in over the weekend, to talk about like ice pick style wound, although it's a little bit bigger than a traditional ice pick. But yeah, it's basically you're poking a hole through somebody when you shoot them with a pistol bullet. So 9mm, I think, is the right, that's where I would start. So our recommendation here on the podcast is start with 9mm. And if you have some other needs or case that you can make for something other than that 9mm, then you should have a good justification for that. One final consideration I think is a really important one to consider is just about the lowest cost ammo that you can buy for, as far as centerfire ammo is concerned. Okay, so we're talking any of your semi-automatic pistol bullets, 380, 9mm, 40, 45, or revolver bullets, even 38 Special, 357 Magnum, and so forth. Like pretty much the cheapest round out of all of that is a 9mm bullet. Like it's consistently the cheapest centerfire handgun round.
Do you think that's just because of its popularity? Or?
Yes, and the fact that it's made. I mean, it's just we're talking economics, right? So supply, demand. There's obviously a high demand for 9mm, but there's a huge supply because it's made all over the world. It's made by militaries. It's made by it is the most common handgun round in the world, so it's readily available, right? And it's constantly being produced. Understand that with some other calibers, some of those are made in like on production schedules or on cycles. Like they're not running those all the time. Mm-hmm. Like that's definitely true of like a lot of your revolver rounds, to where they're like, oh, on Tuesdays we make this, but on Wednesdays we make that. But 9mm we made every day, all the time, right? So what does that mean for you? Well, you want to buy your first gun, you want to practice with it, and you want that practice to be as effective and as cost effective as possible by 9mm.
And when the zombie apocalypse pops off, you're probably going to find 9mm the easiest.
Yeah.
So
capacity, we've kind of addressed that, and I think that makes sense. And we probably don't need to spend more time on this, but capacity, I mean, more is better, right? Arguably, what capacity means is you addressed it already. Less likelihood of needing a reload, right? Do you want to reload?
No, not in the middle of the fight if I don't have to.
I don't want to reload either. So now, where is kind of the magic, number as far as like how many rounds should I have minimum? That's hard to say. But for years, I've been kind of on the, I guess, the boat of I like to if I'm going to carry a gun, I want it to have at least 10 rounds. But honestly, even more than that. I really like 15 plus. 15, I think, is a pretty good place to be. I think 10 is like bare bones minimum. Like, don't go less than 10 rounds. But the nice thing is, I mean, even with, you got guns like a P365, right? It's been out for what, 6 years now, probably, maybe even a bit more. When that thing first came out, it's a very compact gun. I mean, I guess the smallest grip module, you could have a flush fitting mag with 10 rounds. This is very, very small, and it had 10 rounds in it. And all the other common guns of that size would be more like 7 rounds, right? So here you had a very compact gun, and it still had at least 10, and many of them had 12. Okay, like the P365, people would put 12-round magazine in it, right? So like, okay, 12 rounds in a very compact package. Like that's a really, like, that's impressive to think about. That's something that fits in about this size of an envelope as far as a gun goes, and you could have 12 rounds in it. The nice thing though is we got even, we have other compact guns that have 15 rounds even. So my HK VP9 SK, what I typically carry it with is a 15-round mag, and it's still very compact and conceals very well. I feel really, really good about that. I think it's a good mix of size and capacity.
What would you say to somebody who's thinking about carrying a revolver?
Well, they better know what they're doing, and they better not miss.
Because they just have low round count.
Because you're talking either 5 or 6 shots, right?
So are you of the opinion that you should not carry a revolver for self-defense?
I think that you need to be knowledgeable about what you're doing. That's what I think. I think it's more of I think you do see a lot of lesser educated folks that like, oh, I'm going to choose that, nice little J-frame revolver. Well, that's great, and it might be for a variety of reasons, but a lot of times the reason I hear is, well, all I got to do is press the trigger and I always know it's going to work. Okay. That's fine.
That's putting yourself in a position of like, I'm not going to know what I'm doing, so I want this thing to work, even though I don't know how to use it. Like
right.
That's.
I really think it's a revolver. I think is the choice of a professional that really knows what they are capable of and what they can do. And why would you choose a revolver? I think there's some context where it makes sense. Revolvers conceal actually really, really, really well. When I'm going into an environment where I must be concealed and remain concealed, like that there's consequences potentially involved if I was discovered to have a gun, I will often choose a Smith & Wesson 442 5-shot J-frame revolver because it conceals ridiculously well. The profile of it is nothing, and some of that is because they have a little bit more of an organic, rounded shape. Like even the grips and everything to a revolver are more round and less, angular and sharp and things like that. And so there's context where that makes sense, but I think that you really need to know what you're doing, and you need to be quite skilled as a shooter if that's going to be your choice. That's my opinion on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've noticed is you should have an articulable reason. I think, like what is the reason for this particular piece of gear? Sometimes people will buy gear and then I just bought this because it's cool, or I saw somebody else that has it, but you need to have a reason for it besides just that, this is the cool item, I think.
Yeah. Well, it kind of sets us up for our next thing on the list here, which is selecting your firearm based on your mission. I'm going to use the word mission because I don't know why, but I like that word. I really do. But that could just be selecting your firearm based on your particular needs or your particular purpose. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a self-defense or concealed carry mission, because you could attribute everything we're talking about today to any particular context. It could just be that, hey, I'm buying my gun today for a home defense gun, and it's not going to get carried outside the house. It's going to be staged somewhere at home where it's always available at home. It's going to be used if I have to in a defensive context at home. And so, that could be your context, and that's going to be different, in terms of what, like the factors involved in choosing or setting up that gun for home defense might be very well different than what I would choose to do if I was carrying it on my person on a daily basis, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's the next thing that we're discussing here is choosing your, like, you need to first identify what is your mission, what is your purpose, what are you buying this gun for? All right. And then think through all of that, and then start matching up with guns that fit that. Right. So if I'm looking for a low signature, like maybe you work in a work environment, uh, and you make the decision for whatever reason, it's your decision to make. Maybe like your workplace has a policy to not have firearms on their premises, but you make the personal decision that, hey, you know what, my life is worth more than this job. That's a person. I'm not going to tell you what to do in these cases. These are very personal decisions. And I know I have a friend that lost his job because it was found out that he carried a gun at work. Okay, so there are, and that can be life altering, especially depending on the industry or career that you're in, right? Because that could totally
follow you.
Yeah, it absolutely could, right? And so you need to understand those potential consequences. But let's just say you make the decision that, hey, this is more important to me, and so your purpose is, I'm carrying concealed in this environment where I cannot be discovered. And so and for that reason, I might go, okay, I'm going to go with a 5-shot J-frame revolver because that's, for whatever reason, the best choice as you decided. What's probably not the best choice is a Glock 34.
Yeah.
You see what I'm getting at?
Too big, yeah.
Right. So we got to understand our mission or the purpose or the context that we are looking to, fit this all within, and then start identifying a gun that fits that purpose. I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think when it comes to I don't have a lot of experience with revolvers at all. I think my entire life I've only pulled the trigger on a revolver maybe a handful of times. So I don't know anything about them. I know Brian Eastridge and Daryl Bulkey, they've got a pretty good handle on. If you want to learn more about revolvers and that kind of stuff, go check their stuff out. What is
American Fighting Revolver.com, I think.
Yeah. Super knowledgeable. If you want to know more about revolvers and their use of carry, those guys know what they're talking about. I don't personally. In my view, I want more ammo. I wouldn't choose a revolver unless, like you said, I was trying to go for something extra deep carry, because I think that revolver, especially like a J-frame or something like that, would be easier to conceal than even like an M&P shield. An LCP gets even too small, I think.
Yeah. I mean, well, they certainly have a place and a role. Again, they can fit that role of, I need something like super small, super concealable. Maybe I need something that fits in a pocket. Let's just say like that could fill that role, like an LCP or something. But we need to understand everything that goes along with that. I mean, how much more difficult is it to shoot an LCP compared to even just a P365?
Yeah, and accurately, you got to be close to be able to make your good hits with that thing. Not like with you would like a full size pistol.
Yeah, I mean, it's just harder. Okay, I'll tell you a story. I once tried to clean a plate rack at 25 yards, so six plate rack, 25 yards with an LCP. I could go pretty consistently 5 out of 6. I could go pretty consistently 5 out of 6, but you have to like really, I mean, because number one, the sights on those are not that great to begin with. They're just like little bumps. And so you have to really pay close attention to those sights. You got to really monitor them really closely. And because the sight radius itself on such a short barreled gun is so short, the slightest deviation translates to a huge spread downrange. And so you really got to make sure things are dialed in on the sights. And then of course you're shooting these relatively small targets at 25 yards with a double action trigger that's not super smooth, right? And so you're like squeezing your way to that trigger, trying to keep everything perfectly aligned. And I think I could probably do it now because this was several years ago. But I so wanted to clean it 6 out of 6 on one of those plate racks. I would always need at least one makeup shot somewhere, amongst those 6 plates. That was still pretty accurate shooting, I think, with a gun that size. Well, my point is, it is a bit more of a close range gun. Doesn't mean you can't be accurate with it. It just means it's really, really, really hard.
Well, that's why they call, a lot of revolvers, or at least snub noses, they call them belly guns. Because they would just stick. You're not aiming and shooting, you're just sticking it on somebody and pulling the trigger a bunch of times.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of I think you could still be very effective with guns like that. It's just harder, and that's why again I said a minute ago with like J frames, for instance, that you just really need to know what you're doing and be good with it. Like your skill level needs to be relatively high.
Whatever you buy, practice with it.
Oh, that's always true for sure. Hey, we got a comment here from somebody who says that he's a big believer of crossovers, as he describes them, saying he likes full size grip with a compact slide. I actually like compact grips with full length slides. So I'm kind of opposite of you. T2PT1. That's an interesting YouTube name. But that's cool that you got something that you like. My only thing with like full size grips in carry guns is that a little bit more difficult to conceal at times. And we have another comment from Shalane. She says, I think it's she. Yeah, looks like a she. Carry a Taurus TX22, which is a 22 long rifle. Yep. And hey, as long as you know what you're doing there, and you know you can place rounds where they count, knock yourself out. Just the other thing to know with semi-automatic 22s is that rimfire cartridges are just not as inherently as reliable as your larger centerfire stuff. So a little bit more there's the potential for the prevalency of malfunctions.
I'm not familiar with this. Is this a semi-auto?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually have one in the safe in the shop there for holster making.
Well, because a lot of times you'll have feeding issues, right? They
Correct.
tend to have like hard reliability issues.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, with semi-automatic 22s. So that's just something to be aware of. And in my experience, the TX22s, I've got one as well at home. I've shot it a fair bit, and it's actually a great little 22 semi-auto, and has been quite reliable for me. But it's just something to be aware of. So, and then she adds, she says, I forgot to mention I carry a 22 because of my cerebral palsy on my left side. My grip strength isn't the strongest. See, this is someone that's thought through, like, in an ideal world, maybe I would carry this, but my personal needs are that.
That makes perfect sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what we're talking about today with the episode topic here today. So understand what your mission is. All right. Now, in the concealment context, part of that is being concealed, remaining concealed, but still having good access to the gun. One thing that's challenging with really small guns. So you think, I'll go to a really small gun, let's say. Okay. And you can have maybe greater confidence that it'll be concealable. But sometimes those really small guns with small grips and small holsters can be challenging to grip and draw quickly. Mm-hmm. Just speaking from personal experience. Something that's got a little bit more to it, can be a little bit easier to get your hand on as you're trying to draw in an accelerated fashion, which is going to probably be a self-defense context. So just something to consider there. The other thing too, that is not as intuitive, and we think about it all the time with holster making, is that a lot of times folks will choose small guns like micro compact, subcompact guns, thinking, well, that'll be easier to conceal, and then the holster they get along with it matches that gun, including the length of it. And you need to understand that the shorter the barrel of the gun and the shorter the holster, it tends to not, it often does not conceal as well. And the reason why is because you need more length in that holster. It acts like a keel. This is another John Houtman from Philster example. He calls it the keel principle, that the keel of a boat helps keep that boat upright. Because you got let's say a sail or whatever, like trying to push this thing over, and that keel is going to help keep things upright. Essentially, the length of the holster below the belt is going to be what helps keep that whole thing, that whole package kind of tucked in tight to your body. And when you remove that keel, and the upper portion of the gun starts to lean out from the body a little bit. And so anyway, that's very common with the really small guns and really short holsters. So even with a lot of our holsters that are made for smaller guns, the length of the holster is a lot of times artificially extended longer than the actual barrel of the gun. And that's intentional because it helps carry that gun better, more concealable, and it also helps contribute to comfort as well. And that's not the point of this episode here today. I could get into it some more, but just understand that. But if concealment is your mission, you need to choose a gun that you know that you can conceal well. A lot of folks actually probably think they need a smaller gun than they really do. But I've also seen some folks that definitely choose a gun that's way too bigger, way too big for their particular body type or size or shape or whatever. Or maybe they're just pairing it with a poor holster. But these are not always easy decisions, but there's a lot that goes into that, and a lot that needs to be considered. But just make sure that the gun choice itself fits your mission. Yeah. Here's another one. It needs to be easily adaptable to the user. So it needs to be, another way to think of this too is ergonomic. Okay. And I don't necessarily mean ergonomic in the way of that it's, that it feels good in the hand or that it fits the hand. So for instance, I carry an HK now. One of the common things I hear about folks that try HK VP9s, P30s, and the like is they like the way the grip is contoured on those pistols. Like, it just feels so good in the hand. It's like, okay, that's cool. I'm glad it does. Really, I'm glad it feels good to you. And it feels good to me too, just so you know. That's not why I chose that gun. I didn't choose it because it feels good to me, because feeling good in the hand does not really translate to anything meaningful, other than maybe it's a comfort factor for you, personally. Mm-hmm. Feeling good does not necessarily mean you're going to shoot it better, right? And something can feel good and not necessarily fit your hand well, or not enable you to get the proper grip on the gun. And so, so don't confuse, so-called ergonomics with, translating into actual shooting performance or ability. That's an important thing to understand here. When I say ergonomics, I mean that the gun itself actually fits you. And so first and foremost, you need to be able to get a proper grip on there and be able to reach the trigger in an acceptable fashion. For instance, if the gun is too big and you can get your finger on the trigger, but in the process, the inner portion, the part of your finger closest to your hand, is rubbing against the frame because you're stretching out there trying to reach the trigger. Well, that's going to potentially affect, how well you can press that trigger and without inducing movement into the gun, mm-hmm. right? So you need a gun that's properly fit to you. You need to be able to reach the trigger properly. You need to have a little bit of a gap between your finger and the frame of the gun. You just want essentially the tip. I'm not saying the literal tip. I don't think that's ideal, but you need that first distal joint of your finger in only that in contact with the trigger. That's what you're looking for. Okay. And if you can't do that, then chances are that gun doesn't fit you properly. I have fairly large hands, fairly large palms. I'm a guy, but my fingers are actually relatively short. So you'd be surprised. I actually, with guns like my HK VP9, I use the smaller back strap. That's one of the things I appreciate about the VP9 series and P30s as well from HK. And there's other guns that do this too, of course. But you got 3 different back straps and 3 different side panels on both sides that you can swap out. So you can kind of change the contour and shape and width and thickness and everything of the grip of that gun. I go with the smaller one for that back strap. Why? Because I need a little bit extra help to reach the trigger in the way I want to. Mm-hmm. That's probably surprising to a lot of people. So that's what I mean when I talk about ergonomics and being easily adaptable to the user. So even Glock does that now, where there's the standard Glock frame size, but then you can add different back straps to it and things to customize that a little bit. SIG is really good with this, although you generally have to buy a totally different grip module, but at least it's available. Although the X Macro has interchangeable back straps, so that's pretty nice. What else? Smith & Wesson M&P is pretty good about this. You can swap out the back straps on those. See, SIG, Smith & Wesson's, HK. Yeah, kind of touched on all those big 4 ones anyway.
The big companies, even the smaller companies are coming out with their own changes so you can customize it.
And you want to be able to reach the other controls too. So mag release, not that you have to be able to reach it perfectly with your thumb, because I break my grip on reloads every time.
I do too, yeah.
And it's really not that big a deal, because during the time you're completing the reload, you can be readjusting that as necessary. It's not a big deal, but it's nice if you can reach the mag release. You should be able to reach the slide stop, right? So you can comfortably, easily release or lock the slide back. You should be able to, let's see. Yeah. Or if you have a decocker, if it's in the case of a double action gun, things of that nature. So you want to be thinking about, can I reach the controls? Can I properly reach the trigger? Is this gun adaptable in the way that I can change out back straps or side panels and things like that, so I can customize it to fit me a little bit better? And is it also adaptable in, actually, no, this will be more the aftermarket side of things. So we'll come back to that. So, but it's kind of similar in some respects. You want to, in other words, make the gun your own gun if where possible. And some guns make that easier than others. right? So that's another factor you might want to consider with respect to, choosing your first gun or your next gun. Other thoughts on ergonomics or adaptability?
Nope, I think you nailed it. I think our commenter who had the cerebral palsy, I think that kind of all falls in line with that, like what's going to be most ergonomic for her. Clearly she's done her research. She knows what works best for her, and that she has a philosophy for why she's carrying that. And that's, I think that's what's important.
Agreed. Absolutely. This probably goes without saying, but your gun should be accurate, or at least accurate enough.
Combat accuracy.
Yeah. What is that?
It's being able to shoot fast enough and accurately enough to interrupt as many body systems as possible to stop the threat.
Yeah. So, but let's put that into something, measurable, if you will. I think that my personal opinion is I like my guns to be able to group about 2 inches at 25 yards. That's my personal opinion. Does it have to be that accurate? Maybe not necessarily, but that's kind of the standard I like to use. And I would say that most of your modern firearms, even your semi-auto handguns, are probably accurate enough. So it's just something to be aware of. Like, you should test that gun. You should take it and shoot it, shoot some groups with it, and make sure that you can put bullets where you intend to. It's like what you said. I mean, we're looking to interrupt major systems of the body and do so quickly and reliably and rapidly. And that means I need to be able to obviously shoot, but if I have the skill, then I need the gun to also support that, meaning that where I'm aiming, that's where bullets should go. That's where I want them to go. So the gun should be capable of doing that. It's less of an issue nowadays, I'd say, because honestly, we are in the golden age of modern firearm manufacturing. Manufacturing is so good nowadays. Tolerances are so much better than it used to be. And even though there was a time, a day and an age where things were more made by hand, and there's certainly an appreciation for that, we lose some of the appreciation for quality when so much of what we consume nowadays is made by machines. However, so much of our stuff being made by machines also means it's made very consistently, right? There are less variables that can get introduced that might impact things like accuracy because of the tolerances that modern manufacturing are able to maintain. So less of an issue, and that's why this was put, I guess, further down on the list in terms of accuracy of your chosen gun. But it is something, and you need to understand too, though, that sometimes there's mismatches between ammo and guns. Like, some guns just don't like certain bullets or certain bullet profiles, or maybe it's the actual diameter of the bullet itself. Understand that a 9mm bullet is generally 0.356 inches in diameter, but there are bullets that are 0.355. There are some that are 0.357, and those are all within either direction of 0.356. They're within a 10,000th of it, or within a thousandth of an inch. Okay, which is it's not like just because my chain or my bore is sized for 0.355 bullet and I fire 0.357 through it, it's not going to blow up on me, more than likely. That's all within acceptable tolerances. But you might have a barrel that for whatever reason does not like 0.355 inch diameter bullets. Okay, and that may translate to not very desirable accuracy at distance.
Right.
So kind of getting in the weeds on that a little bit, but that's the reality of it. So again, we're going to test our ammo with our guns, not only for reliability, but also making sure that the ammo we use, particularly our self-defense ammo, is accurate in the gun too. So we want to have confidence that if my sights are there, that's where I expect that bullet to appear.
Yeah, you don't want to be thinking in the middle of, I hope this works.
Exactly.
Absolutely not.
I want confidence in my equipment.
Yeah.
And then finally, good aftermarket support. This one is kind of interesting, and sometimes I think it's often not considered by many purchasers of guns. And I'll give you an example. Over the weekend, when I was in this Range Master Instructor Development course, there was somebody, that's right, they were using an IWI Masada pistol, not a super common pistol. And so what I found interesting about that is they were also left-handed. So what's interesting about that is, let me just tell you, where can you find a holster for an IWI Masada out there in the market? Not very many places.
All right, I gotta take care of this. This is driving me crazy.
No, Brian's got someone needs him on the phone, so he'll come back. So um, where was I? Sorry, that his phone's been going off the hook for a while, so he's been doing really good to keep it all together. So an IWI Masada, like there's not that many options out there for holsters for that particular gun. And now you're left-handed, and it makes it even more difficult because not every holster manufacturer is able to make holsters for left-handers and also for a somewhat uncommon gun. And so just understand that with respect to choosing pistols, that should be a factor as well. That it does not help you at all to choose a gun that doesn't have a lot of support in the aftermarket. That includes holsters. That includes other accessories like sights. We've got a special guest here. This is Mars. Those of you watching on video, this is
Mars, the medical Malinois.
Yeah, Brian's pup. Beautiful, beautiful dog. So we're talking holsters. We're talking things like sights, because sights I think are also a very personalized choice. If I'm using sights, like I want them to give me the sight picture I desire. Right. And what I like to see in my sight picture might be different than what you like to see, or what Jacob likes to see, or whatever. So sights are also something that it's like, hey, if I'm shooting only Glock pistols, I can find sights all day long for Glocks, easy peasy, no big deal. But for, I don't know, a Canik TP9SFX or something, like I'm just pulling that out of, I have no idea. I've never bothered to look for sights for those, but that might be harder to find. Buying magazines for your gun. Hey, if you're using a Glock or a SIG or M&P or whatnot, and I'll tell you, this is actually one of the things that's a bit challenging as an HK shooter. So I'm kind of eating my own words here a little bit, but finding magazines sometimes can be problematic for certain guns. But I can walk into any gun store and find a magazine for a Glock. I can go into a store and find so sights are a lot of times available too, but holsters a lot of times, if I'm in a pinch and I just need something today, like I can find a holster, chances are relatively quickly, or I can find a manufacturer online and that's got a holster ready to ship for those more common pistols. So these are just things that you want to be considering as the aftermarket support for particular guns and brands as well. So the funny thing is when people, like, I get it, like sometimes people I think choose certain guns just because they want to feel special or different in some way. And I get that. Like, I don't necessarily my personality is not the type to want to just get in lockstep with, the rest of a crowd, for instance, like kind of the whole, herd mentality sort of thing. I like to think for myself and do things my own way and forge my own path. And I respect people that also want to do that and not just go along with, the latest flavor of the day that, everybody else is like, this is great, why don't you try it too? It's like, cool. No, I want to do things my own way. And I think some of my gun choices in the past reflected that desire a little bit. It's like, well, everybody does this, but I don't want to be like everybody. I want to do something different.
Right.
And that's fine, except that it can create challenges for you finding products and aftermarket support for your chosen gun when you're choosing something that's kind of off the beaten path a little bit.
Well, a lot of times that can be a totally reasonable weapon. It can be on par with Glock or M&P and that kind of thing. But just because it's a lesser known, not nearly as popular, you're just gonna have a hard time finding stuff for it. When I worked in a gun shop right after I got out of the military, I worked in a gun shop for a little while. I remember having people that would come in and be like, hey, I have this gun. Do you carry a holster for it? And we would tell them, like, no, I've never heard of that gun before, and they're like, exactly. Okay, I'm on to the next gun shop then. They spent all this money, bought this gun, and now they can't buy any aftermarket things for it. And then one of the problems that they wind up having is because they can't find a holster, then they go to like one of those Uncle Mike's universal ones with the Velcro, and that kind of stuff, which isn't the best option out there, especially for defensive carry, right, and that kind of stuff. So, planning ahead of time, is this a weapon that I can find stuff for? That's always going to be, beneficial for you.
Yeah. And it also, goes even a step beyond that as far as like maybe you want a different mag release or slide lock lever or, like SIGs, for instance, are an interesting example for this because and I say by that, I mean like the P320s in particular, because it's a very modular design of a gun where the gun itself is really the actual, it's called the, FCU, the firearm control unit. That's that metal like it's the guts of that pistol, but everything else, the actual grip, itself, the slide, everything else on that can be swapped out, changed out, whatever. Like the only part that's the gun is the actual metal guts that sit in a metal, what's the word I'm looking for? A chassis. There we go. It's a chassis that sits inside there, right? That's the actual gun. And so you can change out pretty much everything else. Easy. And there's all kinds of manufacturers that make different grip modules and different takedown levers, even that have like little thumb rests and different mag release buttons and different. Just you can swap out so much stuff with that because it's a very modular design. That's really cool because then what you see, people post pictures online of their P320, and no one P320 can be the same as another one in some cases, because you can truly customize it to you, to your taste, to your likes, to your fit, to whatever it is that you're looking for. And that's pretty cool. And, some other guns, you can do that as well, a little bit too, to some extent. And certainly you can swap out, mag releases and slide stops and put mag wells on and things on a Glock and swap out sights and all that as well. But it's just something to think about. If you want to truly make your gun yours and make it fit you and make it work the way you want it to be, look at something that's a bit more modular and or has a lot of aftermarket product support. So again, using that example, the IWI Masada that I saw somebody shooting over the weekend, there's not a lot of aftermarket support for that. Like you just, like, the gun you get for the factory is kind of what you're going to be stuck with. You might be able to swap out the iron sights if you want something different, but you're going to struggle to find a holster for it. Let me speak to a little bit from the other, like the opposite perspective as a holster manufacturing company, KSG Armory. We get people all the time like, well, how come you don't make a holster for, choose your brand and model?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it's like, well, because it's not common or popular enough. Well, it sure seems like it is to me, except that it's not. It's one thing when you're talking about, Smith & Wesson M&P line of pistols. There's millions of those out there. Okay. There's just not that many of some of these other, guns that people, again, choose your flavor of the day. Or if it's something that's really new, like we're a bit slower to adopt some of the new stuff because, number one, we want to make sure it's going to pan out as a product, right? The new gun gets released last week. And, hey, don't you make a holster for that yet? No, because one, it takes time and money to, do what we have to do to create molds to make a holster for that. Number two, I want to make sure that there enough of those things sell, that it's not, that I'm not going to be stuck with making an investment in developing holster molds and everything for that new gun, and I only sell holsters for the next 2 months, and after that, just
or you sell that one holster, put all that time and energy, it's just not sustainable.
And I know that's absolutely a thing. Talking to other fellow holster builders in the industry, where somebody's like, "Hey, I really like it for this," and so they go ahead and buy molds for it, and they sell one or two of them,
Mm-hmm.
and you never recover your cost, your investment that you made in acquiring molds for that. And so that's the and that's why there's kind of this like chicken and egg problem a lot of times with different things, and that's why it's a bit safer sometimes to stick with those more common, more popular brands that we sort of mentioned earlier. I'm not saying those are the only ones you should consider at all, just that that those have really good support, especially on the aftermarket side.
Well, there's a reason why they're popular, and especially, if you look at the professionals in the industry, what are they carrying? There's a decent reason for it. And as you progress in your journey and you understand things on a deeper level, then you can start to make those little tweaks and your own little personal choices, because now you'll understand why.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, we've talked about all this to talk about, factors and things you should consider in buying your first gun or buying, any gun for that matter, especially for concealed carry use, let's say. But let's get to the question of why I carry an HK now. So HK approached me quite a while ago now, over a year ago, and said, "Hey, we'd love to put a gun in your hands and have you test and just see what you think." I'm like, "Sure, I'm always down for that." So they sent me an HK VP9L, and I spent the better part of the next year shooting that off and on, testing it, put a couple, 2,000 to 2,500 rounds through it, and just gave it a full look over and evaluation. I found immediately that it was incredibly accurate out of the box. Didn't have to do a thing to it. And I could, if I stick it on a rest and shoot at 25 yards, I can shoot 1-inch groups very, very consistently. Not the accuracy is the most important thing, but it's nice when you can just sort of check that box and it's like this, and it almost doesn't matter what kind of bullet I run through it. It's accurate. And so that's awesome. Okay, box checked. And that was like the first thing, actually one of the first times I actually used it for a demo in a class. I was teaching a class, and I sometimes will rotate through guns when I'm teaching my 2-day pistol intelligence class. I like to be able to demonstrate proficiency with multiple different guns to my students, so they see that what ultimately trumps gear is skill, and the ability to use a gun's a gun's a gun, right? And so I remember the first time I demonstrated, I was shooting a 1-inch square, 10 yards, and I could just drill that 1-inch square like offhand and just standing there, just sticking bullets through that 1-inch square. And I'm like, holy cow, it just felt easy compared to the other thing I was shooting at that time. That definitely not inherently as accurate. So the HK VP9L has been very accurate. So that box checked. Super, super reliable. And I know this is important to HK. I know that they really over-engineer their equipment. That's true across everything that they make. And so very, very reliable, very, very, quality. A lot of quality goes into the making of those guns. So that box is checked. I got it in 9mm, box checked. Capacity, good capacity, box checked. Concealable. So I carried the VP9L. Once I started actually carrying an HK, that was all I had at the time, was the VP9L. That's a 5-inch full-size gun. I'm a large dude, and I can get away with that most days, depending on exactly what I'm wearing, what I'm doing activity-wise. But eventually I did acquire a VP9SK, which is the subcompact model. And that thing, now that's pretty much all I carry, because it conceals super well. I can throw I can wear just a basic t-shirt, and it's not an issue to carry that and conceal it and keep it concealed in most contexts. So that's really the ideal choice. And the thing is I was worried with the SK that I would lose some of the performance potential from the full-size gun. But I'll tell you, those VP9 SKs I was impressed the very first time I shot it. I can per inch keep up neck and neck with the full-size gun, even with that being a subcompact version of it. It's actually impressive how well, because a lot of times what we find with the smaller guns is, snappier, jumpier, not as controllable, whatever, not as much of a grip to hold on to and things. Now, that's true in the case if you use the flush-fitting 12-round mag with the SK model, but I typically run it with the slightly extended 15-round mag. And HK did something really smart with that. The 15-round mag has got a unique sort of rounded profile to it's a lot of times you see companies come out with an extended version of a mag. There's not a lot, it's just extended, Mm-hmm. HK was really smart in the way they created that extension for the 15-round subcompact mags. It's got a very unique rounded profile. It doesn't, even though you're adding 3 round capacity length to that magazine, it doesn't feel like it. Okay, so really, really impressive job they did with that, and I really appreciate that. So it's got good capacity, it's concealable, it's super adaptable to the user. Okay, so I can swap out, again, all the side panels, the back plate or back strap, all of that. And there's pretty good aftermarket support for HKs. Not as good as some of the other options out there, that's for sure. But there's good enough aftermarket support that I can find all the things that I need, and it's getting better, because I also work with a company called Gray Guns, and I'll just tell you that there's some things in the works that will further enhance and grow the availability of aftermarket products and things for HK, especially HK VP9 pistols. So
what do you find that you have a hard time locating for HKs, do you think?
Well, there's not, magazines is probably the biggest challenge. Okay. And but they're out there, and you can find them online and order them online. It's not too big of a deal, but not as readily available. Like, I can't count on walking into the local gun shop and finding, HK VP9 mags. They're often there, but they're not always there. And so that can be a challenge. That's probably the biggest hang up. But for me, everything else I like well enough to overlook that aspect. And that's important, as we're as we're looking at these different factors that we've discussed today. Like, if you want to assign them a score, like, this is true of pretty much all the guns out there. Like, nothing no one gun is going to be perfect score on all the different categories, right? There's going to be somewhere where, well, it really shines here, but not so much here. And so for me, the HKVP9 hits on pretty much everything except for kind of the aftermarket side of it. Can be a little bit more challenging. Holsters isn't usually too big a deal to find. Even Filster just released a new release on their Filster. I guess skeleton holster is now available for VP9s. That's cool to see. And of course, we at KSG Armory are actually kind of known for making holsters for HK pistols, because there's plenty of holster makers out there that don't really even support HK pistols, but we've been making HK holsters for years. And certainly if you need one for a P30 or a VP9 or even HK45 or USP compact, like we make holsters at KSG Armory for those. So yeah, it checks all the boxes. Lose a little bit on the aftermarket side, but I think that's going to improve. And I hope to actually help them improve that by helping develop more aftermarket products and things. Be able to, so I have the push button mag release version with, that's probably one of the other things that people, they look at the HKs like, well, I don't like that paddle, mag release.
I don't like that either.
The nice thing is that they're getting more and more open to the idea of having push buttons. So the VP9s have what they call their B model, which the B model is the push button version. That's what I have. And I'm hoping that we'll see a aftermarket, mag release. Because I do think I'd like to see just a little bit more extension on that mag release button. So we'll see if we can get that brought to market as well. So there you go. That's why I carry an HK. Brian, what do you carry?
So I really like the M&P. That's like, if I've got a gun and I want the bullets to just go where I want them to without thinking, then that tends to be what I like. But I carry the Glock 19.
Nice.
More because the Glock 19 that I have is from a friend that I carry in his memory. And then also because if I need to find magazines, there's a good chance that if I need a battlefield reload kind of a thing, and there's magazines laying around,
sure,
there's a good chance that you're going to find Glock mags. A lot of my friends carry Glocks too. So if I happen to be out with them and we get in a gun battle, we can trade magazines back and forth. If it were to happen, we could do it. So that's tends to be my philosophy of use. Is most of my friends carry Glocks and magazines are interchangeable and that kind of thing. And it's very reliable. Glocks aren't super comfortable, like you said, for me to shoot. Very boxy, but I shoot it really well. I've won some competitions with my stock Glock 19. And I know it runs, it's super reliable. It works every time and it gets the job done. So yeah, that's my preferred.
That's not a bad choice. For a long time, I carried a Glock 19. So for a long time, actually several years. So that was before my SIG days, and now the SIG days are behind me, and now we're on Team HK. So anyway, that's all really good, thoughts that you had there.
Well, you're really talking up the HK. I need to put some rounds down range on that.
Absolutely, you should.
Yeah,
I think
I don't think I've ever shot one.
Yeah. Well, folks, I hope you've enjoyed today's. I appreciate Scott just commented there a moment ago saying great topics today, guys. Good coverage. Thank you, Scott, for tuning in. Thank you for your comment. Appreciate it. Again, folks, if you don't mind sharing the podcast with anybody you can, share it up on the socials, send a text to somebody, whatever. Tell them to tune into the Concealed Carry podcast. Be greatly appreciated. Of course, you're always welcome to leave a review of the podcast via your favorite podcast app, Spotify, let's say, or Apple Podcasts, or there's a couple other places you can leave reviews. Always appreciate seeing your reviews. Today's episode is sponsored by KSG Armory Holsters. KSGArmory.com is a website for that. And also EDC Belt Co. or EDCBeltCo.com and the Foundation Belt. I definitely encourage you to check that out if you want a quality true EDC concealed carry belt that's comfortable and supports your equipment and your gear the way it needs to. Check it out, EDCBeltCo.com. And we mentioned again, just as a reminder, this week, it's actually this next week as of the time that we're recording this, but when this is officially released, it'll be that week. June 1st to the 7th is Gun Storage Week. So appreciate your support of, I think, a very important thing to acknowledge. go to gun storage. I think it was gunstoragecheck.com. Yeah, gunstoragecheck.org. I apologize if I misspoke on that earlier. I may have said .com. Gunstoragecheck.org. And yeah, there we go. I hope you enjoyed again the content today and give you some food for thought on factors and considerations with choosing your first gun, or at least your next gun, and what you should look for. Brian, any final words?
No, I don't think so. Thanks for hanging out, guys.
Absolutely. Folks, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.